In one of the headlines of your report, you call public service media an endangered species.
Yeah, because I do. I think if we don't do, I feel quite strongly about this. If we do nothing, if we just carry on as we are, it really will wither on the vine. Do we want a place where the BBC are the only people that do it? We will wake up one day and you'll find that it's gone, and then you'll miss it.
Isn't the fact that they are an endangered species, isn't that because Ofcom's regulatory framework hasn't kept pace?
And so we're sort of encouraging the broadcasters to take the great content that they make, that kind of knits us all together, that reflects British culture, and put it on places where eyeballs are, and YouTube is one of those.
Tell us a little bit about what that might look like.
Well, I think traditionally the broadcasters see themselves as rivals. And everyone used to get the Barb overnights, and had you beaten Channel 4, or when I was at Channel 5, I was trying to beat Channel 4.
Yeah.
But the world has changed, hasn't it? And I think that they're competitors now, not each other, but they're the big global platforms. And I think it's really important, and we think Ofcom think it's important that they collaborate a lot more than they have been doing in the past.
Welcome to TellyCast, the podcast for everyone at the sharp end of the content business. I'm Justin Crosby, and in this episode, we're diving straight into the future of public service media. With audiences flocking to YouTube, Netflix, TikTok and beyond, the UK's traditional broadcasters, the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, STV and S4C, are facing what the UK's media regulator, Ofcom, itself now calls an endangered species moment. Joining me today is Ofcom's Broadcast and Media Group Director, Cristina Nicolotti Squires, fresh from the release of their 6-point action plan designed to safeguard public service media for the digital first age. We'll be asking the tough questions. How did we get here? Is it too late? And can PSBs really survive without new rules to make them visible in the online world? If you care about the future of public service media, whether you're a producer, a broadcaster, a creator, or just a viewer, this is one episode you don't want to miss. All right, Cristina, let's get into it. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me along.
Not at all. Welcome to TellyCast. You've just published a report this week. Tell us about this new Ofcom report and its key recommendations.
We've called it transmission critical because we think actually it's a really critical time for the public service broadcasting industry. Audiences have changed. They've gone to all sorts of different platforms. The cost of production's gone up. And we just think that unless something is done and done soon, this great broadcasting culture and landscape that we have in this country, making programmes that bring people together, bring Britain together, and that we all love, and our research shows us that people love this kind of content, is under threat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people in the UK hold public service broadcasters very close to their heart, particularly the BBC, but all the other broadcasters as well in certain ways, shapes and forms. Now, there's a number of different recommendations that you've published this week. First of which is that we're going to cover now when we talk about is securing prominence on YouTube. Essentially, young people in particular are not watching broadcast television on their TVs, and we'll talk about a few stats a little bit later in the show, but I think everybody realises that nobody's watching telly anymore, certainly in the younger demographic. And we've seen the rise of YouTube, particularly in the last 18 months or so, 2 years or so. So you're encouraging public service broadcasters to put more content on YouTube. Is that the basic?
It's one of the things we're calling for.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no point. First of all, it's really important to say that regulation doesn't make audiences watch programmes. You've got to make good programmes. But we've also got to make good programmes and then put them where people are watching them. And as linear viewing is declining, and there's a crowded landscape now with the Netflixes, Amazons, etc. of this world. YouTube is a place where a lot of content is being consumed, and interestingly, it's not just young people. I think there's something like a 48% increase in over 55s consuming YouTube now. Yeah. And so we're sort of encouraging the broadcasters to take the great content that they make, that kind of knits us all together, that reflects British culture, and put it on places where eyeballs are, and YouTube is one of those.
Yeah. And why has there been resistance, in your view?
I think, look, all broadcasters have got their own methodology and their own sort of strategies they want to follow. I think in the past there's been an idea that they don't want to give their content away, and I understand that. And the idea was you'd put clips and hope that would drive back to your platforms.
Yeah, they've used it as a marketing tool.
Yeah, and I think that's worked to a certain extent. But when you do put content that you either create just for the YouTube audience or whether it's whole shows, you can get an extra audience. So just to pick them out, Channel 4 has done a lot of work in this area. They announced, their fast forward digital strategy. I think it was last year, wasn't it? And their Channel 4.0 is giving them good audience numbers. They're not taking them away from the linear ones, they're adding to them. So it's just a really good way of making sure that public service broadcasting is getting to all kinds of people, not just those who are watching on linear.
Yeah, and crucially for Channel 4, obviously, they're selling their own ad space within YouTube, and that's obviously an arrangement they have with them. So that is something that allows them to sell across both linear and digital advertising, and that's one of the keys that's helping them make that stack up from a commercial perspective. But when we talk about broadcasters putting content onto YouTube, what's to say that content won't just get buried? If it's BBC content or whatever content it is, there's not really any reason why YouTube should give it any undue prominence or prominence over and above any other creator content.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that is one point of view, but I might sort of change it slightly. I think it's important to recognise that YouTube is having good relations with those broadcasts we've mentioned. You talked about the Channel 4 deal. They are having good talks and relationships. And actually, YouTube does put a fair amount of news content as a newsreel when there's big breaking news events. And I think it helps both sides. I mean, YouTube is becoming a bit of a television platform, frankly. Yeah. And if you put good stuff on your platform, people will come to it. And so I think it's kind of in YouTube's interest as well to have great content that audiences can discover, as well as for the broadcasters to be getting more eyeballs.
Yeah. So you've also asked the government for some clarity on the future of digital terrestrial TV. What are you, in your view, what should that decision be? Because obviously we're seeing massively falling numbers there. Obviously there's a public service remit to certain communities that maybe don't have access to broadband or enough access to broadband, but equally, is that reason still to keep a very expensive service still running? I mean, what's your viewpoint on that?
In our work on this report, obviously we've spoken to loads of different stakeholders, and the PSBs themselves have said to us, we are having to run two systems. We're having to run a DTT traditional system and an IP internet delivered system. Yeah. And we're in effect running two different businesses. And the money we're spending on those means money we can't spend on content. And as you know, the cost of production has gone up. So, literally every penny counts. In terms of what the government decides, I mean, at Ofcom, we've given them a range of options, and they vary from sticking to the current system to going full IP only, or to having some kind of hybrid system. I think what all the broadcasters are telling us, they want some clarity. They're not actually saying it should be one or the other. They just want some clarity for the future, for their business plans. And look, we're becoming a digital society, aren't we? I don't know about you, but I can't book an NHS appointment without using an app.
That's right.
So, the idea that TV should come down an old-fashioned aerial is perhaps a bit backward-looking. But equally, there are also people who, for various numbers of reasons, don't have broadband or don't have Wi-Fi and therefore would struggle. So it is really important that we make sure that whatever decision is made, not only are the companies given enough time to plan for it, but also audiences are as well. And universality is a big part of the BBC's remit, making programmes that's accessible to everybody. I would say that while you've got these dual running systems, there are some people who are not getting the same benefits as they would of IPTV in the way you can choose stuff, you can freeze it, rewind it, etc. So I think it's really important that it's addressed and to be fair, the government have said they'll make an announcement at some point next year. We're just saying we're hearing the broadcasters are telling us, please just let us know what you want to do and when.
So you're not making a recommendation to government?
No, we've given them a range of options. At the end of the day, it is up to government to decide how to do this. And we delivered a Future of TV report to them, I think it was last year, which they welcomed and they're working through, and they will make the decisions themselves.
And how many people are we talking about in terms of that don't have that broadband access?
I think it's something like I think I read somewhere it's something like 10% of people. But there's all sorts of different barriers to broadband. There's the affordability barrier. I mean, it's a utility like other things, but it's not a cheap utility necessarily. There's places where, for whatever reason, that there isn't fibre available in your town, particularly in rural and remote areas, and lots of parts of the UK, are very kind of, topographically challenged, if you like. Yeah. So it's there are some people, and there are also people that just are not particularly tech savvy and don't want to have to use broadband for things.
But I guess at some point there's going to have to be a decision made, because it's going to be cost versus benefit, isn't it? And we see every commercial business out there, whether it's, bank branches or post offices, that are pulling in their networks and pulling their costs down. This is, surely following the same path ultimately.
Yeah, but equally, there are a lot of people who live in, elderly people in particular, live in small villages who really miss having a post office or a bank. So, and would really miss, if all TV was turned over tomorrow onto IP, would really, be able to miss their favourite programmes. It's not TV as well, remember. A lot of radio is delivered using the same masts. So it's a complex thing. We're just calling for the government to give some clarity on when and what they're going to decide.
And do they have to make any decision within a certain time frame?
I just think we've made the point that it needs to be sooner rather than later. There's been various dates bandied around. I think with all these things, something as big as this, if you think about the analog to digital switchover, that took 10 years in the planning. So I think you're looking at a minimum of 10 years.
Right. But there needs to be
the gun has to be fired.
Yeah. There needs to be some sort of structure, some framework put together so everybody knows what's happening. Okay. So you're also recommending more public funding for less commercial genres of content, like news and kids content.
Yeah, I mean, we're not. If you may sound pedantic, we're not saying there has to be. We're just saying we are hearing from the various broadcasters and stakeholders that they are calling for more funding. At the end of the day, how money is spent is down to the government, not to us. There's a number of different options that have been discussed in the public domain. I think there's been a call for a levy on the streamers, which I think government's already ruled out. But we do point out there's been a very popular take-up of what's called high-end TV tax credit, where subsidies are given to high-end dramas. We would say that if that's going to be extended, it should really be to the things that that really struggle commercially. And news has always been a thing that, was cross-subsidised, if you like, and is really, really important. And children's. And, there's a lot of other content made by people who are not public service broadcasters that kind of falls into that bucket, if you like. Sky, for example, does, some really great children's programming. But they don't have to.
And last week, I think they've let their
last week they announced they announced last week that they're not going to commission; they're just going to buy from third parties. So, the PSBs are part of their license conditions is to provide a range of content, and if we didn't have that in place, we might wake up one day and find it's gone, and it'd be too late.
And how would this be funded, though, if we're talking about more funding to go into news and kids content? Well,
again, there's a lot of range of options, and what we're saying in this report, and all of this report, is about starting conversations rather than like, here's the actual X, Y, and Z of how you do it. But, things have been discussed about, do you have a pot of contestable funding that companies can bid for to cover, say, local news? Do you give a tax credit to people that invest in local news? Do you, as part of BBC Charter Review, do you say, actually, let's let the BBC news content be available to local newspapers? There's all sorts of different options.
Yeah, okay. Another one of your recommendations in this report is telling broadcasters to forge ambitious strategic partnerships.
Tell
us a little bit about what that might look like.
Well, I think traditionally the broadcasters see themselves as rivals. And everyone used to get the Barb overnights and, had you beaten Channel 4? Or when I was at Channel 5, I was trying to beat Channel 4. Yeah. But, the world has changed, hasn't it? And I think that they're competitors now, not each other, but they're the big global platforms. And I think it's really important, and we think Ofcom think it's important that they collaborate a lot more than they have been doing in the past.
Yeah.
Actually, we did see a first sign of that recently. I think they all joined together to provide a simpler way for medium and small businesses to buy advertising across all of their things. And it's that kind of collaboration that we're encouraging. I can imagine, they all have players and live streaming services. Could they, for example, have share back-end technology? Could they, one person even suggested, could they even share sort of compliance regimes or whatever? So I think there's lots of different things they can do to work together and sort of shore each other up. Because it's all in, as I said, the public service broadcasting sector is such a vital part of the creative economy in this country, and without it we wouldn't be having the Netflixes and the Amazons coming here to shoot big budget films, big budget productions. So I think we're calling for closer collaboration. Now some have said, should there be consolidation?
Well, that's the next question. Yeah.
I mean, look, again, these are a range of companies in sort of different forms. The BBC obviously is funded by the licence payer. The Channel 4 is publicly owned. ITV is a commercial company. Channel 5 is owned by a big American company, about to become a different American company. How they arrange their business dealings is kind of up to them. The government has sort of, indicated to the CMA that they should look at, if there was a potential merger, they should look at it perhaps in a slightly different light to what they might have done in previous years. But it's not as simple as that. I mean, how would you get ITV to merge with Channel 4, for example? One's a private company owned by shareholders, one's a public company. So, look, as I said, if government wants to kind of insist on that kind of thing, then government, can do so. But I think before you get to that stage, and who knows, I mean, in 10, 15 years time, will there still be 4 different outfits?
Yeah, are they
who
still,
knows?
Is it sustainable?
Yeah,
I think is the question.
But I think there's a real willing now, and as I said, I've spoken to most of the chief executives of these companies. There is a real willing now to kind of collaborate a bit more ahead of, of going the ultimate goal. Because I think it's great for Britain that we've got this plurality. Yeah. And, they've all got very different remits. Channel 5, for example, started making loads of UK-based dramas, which they didn't used to. Yeah. And they're commissioning content from people outside London. They've got a really distinct audience, the Channel 4 audience, which is very distinct from the ITV audience, which is distinct from the BBC audience.
But the problem is nobody's watching them.
Well, they're not watching them necessarily in the old ways that they used to, but their content is still doing well and can do well in different platforms.
Yeah, well, I guess it's that it's getting the balance between reach, which is obviously all the broadcasters want, and that's what the PSBs are struggling with, and plurality, as you say, having those distinct voices. So, I mean, in terms of protecting audiences. So we've seen, the rise of AI-created content, obviously clickbait, deepfakes, lots of different new types of content that are coming in with new technologies. In practical terms, what is Ofcom doing right now in the real world to protect viewers and consumers from this sort of content?
Well, the broadcasters that we license, so that's anyone who's broadcasting on a linear platform in this country, has to provide content that is, duly accurate. So if it's been AI manipulated, then we would encourage them to tell people so. If it's in things like news and current affairs. There's a lot of work. AI is a double-edged thing. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in AI to reduce costs, for example, on production companies. Yeah,
we're seeing a lot that just in the last 2-3 weeks. There's a lot of history content that's been commissioned by A&E, for example, or Hearst Networks now, which contains obviously factually correct, but AI created content which really reduces their costs and gives them an opportunity to
and if you're doing a costume drama, what's the difference between getting a load of costumes that you've hired from a shop and building a set that looks like 17th century Britain if AI can do it for you? And so there is an opportunity to reduce the cost there. There's also opportunities in things like translation and subtitles and accessibility, but yes, there's a risk. And particularly our research at Ofcom, of which we do an awful lot of research, our research has shown that people trust content less the more it's been edited, fiddled with, treated, etc. So I think it's really important for, particularly in areas like news and current affairs, to make sure, and the broadcasters have, discussed this with us, and they, their trust is part of their brand. They want to be quite open with people, and if they do use AI, then they want to say so.
Okay, but you, as Ofcom, you don't have a view on, like I said, reducing, productions that are reducing their costs through the use of AI, whether it be that, like the costume drama example you get. You don't have a particular view on that.
No, as long as content is made that is, accurate, and that it is reflecting all of the UK, then anything that helps bring down the production costs, is not a bad thing at all. There is also the ability for AI to use an awful lot of put out a lot of mis and disinformation, as we call it. And so one of the things in our report you'll see there is we're calling for a sort of a bit more of a focus on what we call media literacy, kind of digital citizenship, kind of asking yourself if you see something on so for example, more and more people get their news off social media. They trust social media a lot less. About 20% of people trust what they see on social media, as opposed to sort of 70% or so when they see news on the big screen. And so it's we're sort of calling for not just the government through education programs, etc., but also the broadcasters and the platforms to do more to help people develop a bit of critical thinking.
Do social channels care?
Depends which social channel you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, nobody particularly wants to intentionally putting around, from the platform's point of view, they don't want to be putting around stuff that isn't necessarily true. But, the broadcasters have got a lot of followers on all these various platforms, and they're very keen to make sure that their content is seen in parallel with perhaps different versions of the same story, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that we kind of, as I said, develop a bit of critical thinking amongst people. And it's not just kids, it's adults as well, about what you see on social media might not necessarily be the whole truth. And actually you should be looking at lots of different things.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to find that, if I see a story that's like a news story, depending on what platform it could be X, it could be TikTok. When I'm not watching content that is maybe news related, I would say recently I've probably found about 10 or 15% of the content I'm looking for is false, is clearly false, and that is hugely influential when it comes to young people in particular.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I've got 19 and 22-year-olds who are my kind of barometer for these things, and I asked them the other day, where'd you get your news? TikTok.
Yeah.
And social media platforms, and I said, how do you know it's true? And they said, first thing they do is look at the comments, because peer-to-peer kind of sort of cross-referencing is interesting to them. And then if it's a story that seems outlandish, they said to me, we'll go to the BBC or ITV to check it. So I think there is that kind of, it's that growing sort of, if it sounds really wild, it's worth checking out with one of the established broadcasters.
They're in quite a media literate family, I
well,
would
they
suggest.
might be, yes. Maybe. You think?
But
no, I'm saying that's the kind of skills that we're calling for people to develop.
Yeah, because your remit, Ofcom's remit, does cover the social platforms, doesn't it? When it comes to news.
Under the Online Safety Act, there is a requirement to make sure that the platforms are delivering their content that's not harmful to children, and there's all sorts of rules about, and it's not my specialist area, but there's rules about illegal terrorist content, etc., etc. There isn't a power about mis and disinformation. I kind of think that's probably right, because what's my information could be your disinformation. But we are, the broadcasters, for example, still regulate their content wherever they put it to the same code we do on the TV, because it's part of their brand. They know that they have a reputation for what they put out on social media channels will be fair and accurate and impartial, and that's a powerful weapon for them, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think it is, and particularly when it comes to the way that news is reported in the UK. I remember looking at the storming of the Capitol on various different US news networks. I was shocked by the different way that it was being reported by Fox and CNN and various different networks. I mean, it was completely night and day. The commentary that was accompanying that that time. But so it is, it's really important that we keep that. That will reinforce the power, I think, of news organisations.
Which is why we're saying to the PSBs, make sure that your content, your public service content, like news, is out on the channels where people are watching it and consuming it, because that is the counterbalance, if you like, to the disinformation out there. Yeah.
Should media literacy be taught in schools?
Only if it's taught the right way. Nothing worse. No teenager will listen to a boring adult wanging on at them about something that they're not particularly interested. I think it's very important that it is part of the curriculum. But that's down to, Department of Education to decide, and the devolved governments. It's not an Ofcom thing.
Is there a movement? Is there any lobbying happening?
Oh, there's always lobbying happening. I think it's actually part of the curriculum in Scotland and in Wales in particular. But it's all about how you do it. I went to a really interesting conference in the Republic of Ireland last year, where their regulator does quite a lot in this area. And I think it was a little competition for people to kind of show community projects, and actually it's at that grassroots level. So a local radio station went and did road shows in schools, reminded me of the olden days, and they had like a campaign through their local libraries. And I think it's those, and we work with a lot of grassroots organisations and community level things. That's the best way for kind of getting information out to people. But yeah, as I said, I think in our report we talk about the importance of it. Again, it's for the government to decide, Westminster government and also the devolved governments to decide what goes in the curriculums in their schools. But we would urge that media literacy should be part of that. It's all part of, they're all going to vote from 16, 17 soon. So they need to be equipped in as many ways they possibly can. Yeah,
well, that makes it absolutely even more critical, doesn't it, for the right choices to be made and the right information to be communicated. So you're promising a fundamental review of broadcast regulation. Specifically, what sort of outdated rules are you seeing now that need scrapping?
We've kept it, and it's not the answer you want, but we've kept it at a kind of relatively high level, because actually what we want to do is to set out a kind of call for evidence later in the autumn to find out, what government obviously is particularly interested, but also what the stakeholders would like us to do. I am committed to making sure that the regulation of broadcasting, and I use broadcasting in sort of a small b, because it's kind of disseminated. It's that content word. I don't like content. It's not as good as programs and shows, is it? But you know what I mean. It's just really important that we make sure that our regulation of content is kind of fit for the modern world and the modern way that we're doing things. And we want to make it easier for the stakeholders to be regulated, as well as for audiences to know that they're kind of kept safe.
Yeah. So moving on to innovation, which is another key recommendation, and you've highlighted how little audience share PSB VOD players like iPlayer and ITVX have compared to Netflix and YouTube, for example. I've got some notes here. PSB VOD players 9% of all viewing. Subscription streaming services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus 15%. And online video sharing platforms like YouTube and TikTok, 19%. So that's twice, over double the amount they're watching PSB on VOD players. Clearly the PSBs have fallen behind when it comes to innovation here. Do you think they're still trapped in a legacy mindset?
I don't think they are anymore.
But they have been.
Well, I think they've been. I think some of them have been a bit slow to kind of deliver content the way people want it done. I'm not going to call out any companies because that would be unfair. And Ofcom, we treat everyone the same. But I think that it is, it's a big ask to have the technology to provide user-friendly, audience-friendly streaming systems that work as well as Netflix, who put billions of money into their technology, whilst still running a legacy DTT platform, is a tough ask for broadcasters. And I think that, in the main, they're doing a good job. I do think that there are big challenges in the future in terms of, as I said, technology is not cheap, and you want to be able to make sure that your player, your streaming, your live streams are kind of evolving to the same sort of standards. And the other thing to remember is that the you have to pay for Netflix and Amazon and Disney Plus and Paramount, and they all certainly add up. And I'm sure, like many of us who are interested in TV, we subscribe to an awful lot of these things, and it becomes a lot of money. And at a time when all our living costs are being squeezed, it's really important that great content is not just on those platforms, but is also being viewed on the public service broadcasters platforms. But I do think, it's a massive challenge for them on a technological basis and an audience experience basis, and that's why I think collaborating together might really help them in that respect.
Right. Okay. So within your recommendations, obviously they're focused around public service broadcasters and the platforms as well. But what about smaller digital first businesses, producers? Because we've seen the rise of small independent studios that are creating their own content and going digital first. Are these recommendations just about protecting and steering the PSBs, or is there anything that that you think should be done to encourage and build a framework and a new economy for digital first studios, smaller studios that can compete? I mean, now, realistically, a small bedroom company can actually compete with a major multinational broadcaster without any doubt, particularly AI is helping that. So, are there any recommendations that you have that are going to protect and encourage those smaller businesses?
This report is specifically about public service broadcasting. There is plenty of public service broadcasting that's done not by the PSBs. There's a lot of, great content, whether it's adolescents on Netflix, or whether it's some great content, some great documentaries I've seen on Netflix, I've seen on Disney Plus. The problem is they're all really great programs, and they do show Britain and they do reflect all different parts of the country, but they don't have to do them. So they can change their mind. Netflix at the moment is commissioning lots of UK content. Toxic Town, for example, was another one. But they might decide in 2 or 3 years' time that they're not going to do it again. So this is specifically about public service broadcasting. Now, Ofcom does have a wider remit to make sure the independent production sector is healthy in this country. We don't have any powers in that respect, but we kind of lead and in discussions on that. But again, I would say that the sort of evolving digital first economy, the people are like making YouTube programs. I saw the other day Avalon are making heard it on your show, Avalon are doing Spitting Image just for YouTube, aren't they? YouTube first. Yeah. So I think encouraging and that's part of what the government I think was doing with its creative skills strategy, recognizing that this is a country that's got amazing talent in creativity, in production, in lighting, and making sure that economy continues to grow. It brings in billions literally for UK PLC, and so I think it's an important part of that production community, but we don't have any specific remits and levers to pull on it.
Yeah. Okay. So in one of the headlines of your report, you call public service media an endangered species.
Yeah, because I think if we don't do, I feel quite strongly about this. If we do nothing, if we just carry on as we are, it really will wither on the vine. Do we want a place where the BBC are the only people that do it? We will wake up one day and you'll find that it's gone, and then you'll miss it.
But isn't the fact that they are an endangered species, isn't that because Ofcom's regulatory framework hasn't kept pace?
Look, regulation doesn't make audiences watch programs, okay, and doesn't stop audience watching programs. So the key to it, you've got to make great content that people to watch where they're watching it. I don't think regulation has stifled any of that at all. In fact, we've encouraged a lot of content to be made outside London in a world where that wasn't the case before. There's a lot more production being made outside London, outside the UK, outside England. We're seeing flourishing communities now in Cardiff. Look at Manchester. Look how that's expanded. So I don't think that regulation has been a break on any of this.
But this intervention, which is is quite a lot of strong recommendations that you're making, and as I say, this is about this endangered species. I mean, is it just too little, too late? I mean, hasn't the horse bolted already? Like 2, 3, 4 years ago. I mean, I think that that everyone's seen the rise of the streamers. Everyone's looked at the challenges that public service broadcasters have had for a number of years. Nothing's changed, and all that's happened is that the eyeballs have gone. And following them, the marketing budgets and advertising budgets have gone and followed them to the social platforms, who are now, the most powerful companies on the planet.
I'm a bit more of a glass half full person. I still think there's some fantastic programming being made that has real consequences. Look at ITV's Mr. Bates and the Post Office. There are still people waiting for compensation, but look how that sparked that conversation and drove that campaigning. And that got really big numbers over that. It was beginning of January, wasn't it? So I think there is a real desire still for people to kind of consume that kind of content. Yeah. It is, it's that more fragmented than it was. That nearly didn't get made
as well, that show, because of the costs.
But it did get made. It did get made. And what we're trying to say in our report is that to make sure that those kinds of programmes are still being made. And yes, they're being made on other platforms, but they crucially don't have to do it. So I think, at the end of the day, if you come up with some great content and it's well made, people will watch it.
So let's look at 5 years' time.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I know, but
eons away. But not.
It's
no.
not, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about 5 years is not even a child's sort of lifetime at school. If you were there, I mean, it's impossible, I realise, for you to say, what's it going to be like in 5 years' time? But what do you think? What would make Ofcom say in 5 years' time that we helped save UK public service media?
What a great thing that would be to be able to say. Look, again, I'm fairly optimistic. The last report we did, Small Screen Big Debate, led to the Media Act, which we're in the process of enforcing. And that is going to make a difference. We are giving prominence to the public service broadcasters on smart TVs, which are now in 7 or 8, 10 out of 10 homes. So that's going to make a real difference to them. Local radio has been deregulated, and so that is continuing to flourish. And there's a lot of stuff in the Media Act about Channel 4 being able to own its own IP to give it a fighting chance. Now, that report was published 5 years ago and is now in play. What I really hope that some of the things that we've put out today are, in 5 years' time, we're enforcing as legislation.
All right. Okay. Well, Cristina, Nicolotti, Squires, thank you so much for joining
Thank you for having me.
It's been really great to have a discussion, and I'd love to speak to your colleague about the social media side in detail at some point. I'd love to have a chinwag about that, but thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's about it for another week's show. TellyCast was produced by Spirit Studios and recorded in London. On next week's show, Danny Joshi from Big Deal Films gives us the lowdown on the BAFTA-winning production business. Until then, stay safe.